Now, another magic thing, with your spot healing brush, set to content aware, I'm going to go in and highlight it. This may or may not work, just as a an advance warning. But sometimes it does, and if it does, it's the best feeling in the world. When it doesn't, it's really annoying. So I'm going to cover the whole strand of hair. And what it does is it removes a strand of hair, but replaces it with the underlying texture of whatever it was that was there. Because content aware is selected, so what it does is it says, all right, if this is going to be removed, what is going to take the place of it? So it does a job of calculating and then replaces it accordingly. Sometimes, again, it doesn't work great. Sometimes it does. The thing to remember is your brush size for content aware must be a little bit larger than the strand of hair you're taking out because it needs to sample areas, above and below it. And that's how it typically works when you're cloning, is you're replacing whatever's there with whatever should be there, kind of guessing what's under it. So you'd sample areas next to it and cover it. So that's what it's doing for a quick version. So sometimes when you have flyaways and things like that, let's go and redo what we just did earlier. So again, sometimes when you have flyaways, it makes it really quick if you don't have anybody that's really finicky to go ahead and use this little content aware trick to just remove out little flyaways.
So Pratik, I find on the content aware or the spot healing brush that it does depend often on the directionality of how you brush.
Yes, exactly. Like you can be doing squiggles across the hair, but you have to literally cover the direction of the hair itself, yet leaving just enough space to sample those 2 points. Yeah, good point. Like if I took my content aware, right, my content aware spot healing brush, I couldn't do a patch of circle because it doesn't really know what you're expecting, right? It's like trying to ask someone what's for dinner. I don't know. You're trying to fight with it.
There was a question about whether how you would do, from Joe Fotosiyamo, how do you deal with soft facial hair on women? How much to remove and best technique to do so?
Excellent. So this will be a multi-step technique. And at this step of the process, what I'm going to do is essentially just take away the ones that are illuminated at this level when we're zoomed out. At this point, you'll realize that nothing much is illuminated right now. So everything is coming in whenever you're zoomed in. And what that means is that I wouldn't touch it right now, because later on is where we're going to be doing most of the evening in regards to the hair. Okay? It's fine to take away things that are the hairs that are most illuminated, but don't take away everything because you'll be left with this patchy, disgusting piece of skin. And that's worse than the hair you started with. It's going to be one of those things that when we're finished, you'll see why it adds to the character of the image rather than takes it away. But it's hard to visualize that, especially when you're at this step and you just want to take away everything right now. Let's see here. Take away 5/8 here, maybe a couple on this side. And again, the reason I'm zoomed in at this point right now is just to take away the things that I saw zoomed out, but I want to just zoom in real quick and have it, become much easier for me. And this guy's here. You can kind of see I'm not as precise as people would expect me to be in regards to just taking away things, because in the next step, what happens is we're going to be evening out tonality and blotchiness in a really efficient manner. So right now, I save my wit's end for that point because it's not so imperative at the moment. The most imperative thing is you're removing the things that actually matter to you the most in a pretty efficient manner. Let's see here, a couple more. And let me zoom out again, double check. Now let me actually do one thing about this line. Now this line right here, okay, is really interesting. Some people say, let's take it out. Some people say, hey, you know what, forget about the line, keep it in there, it's natural. So what do, right? Obviously, if you want to keep it in, you keep it in. If you want to take it out or lighten it, this is where we're probably going to do it. You could lighten this by dodging and burning or lightening it up things in the next step. However, if you want to do it now, there's one thing you can do, 2 things you can do. I just thought of a second one. So I'll show you one way. First, we're going to go in with our healing brush, And I'm going to have my healing brush set to something that's going to cover the actual line here. Oh, please work. Let's see. I'm going to sample up top. I'm going to come down. And I'm going to let go. And what happens is it heals it out, but it has this little strand of discoloration, which is fine because you can go over it again one stroke and it'll remove that discoloration. But let's say you don't want to remove it completely. You want something in between. You can go to Edit and Fade Healing Brush. And what that does is now the last stroke that you did, you can fade it out. So you don't have to have it all, but you can lighten it up. And that's always fantastic because you don't, if you want something in between, that's great. But if you want more or less, you can change it just based on whatever stroke you're doing. And I recommend doing this instead of adjusting the opacity on the layer, because what happens is when you adjust the opacity on the layer, it adjusts the opacity on everything you've done. Okay? So I'm going to hit save again, Command S, it's saving the background. And now, let's see, let me undo that real quick. And you could even do that with a clone brush. Yeah.
I just wanted to say I love my fade tool and I have an action that I made for it, but you have to erase a step if you try to make that an action. And because you're making an action in between and stuff and hitting play and stuff.
Right, so it's almost like counterintuitive in a sense. So the action is doing a little bit more than you anticipated to do.
Well, the action is fine because it's now a button, but you have to like make the action a little bit awkwardly.
I understand, because you have to go through. Sometimes actions work in a way that you don't expect them to. When you think it should go right, it goes wrong. Photoshop is very finicky sometimes.
Because fade only does it to the last thing that it's done before.
That's
so
right.
You're doing an action in between, so you have to like.
Yeah, I understand. Definitely understand. Now the good thing is with this fade tool, it also works with a clone brush. So you can say, you know what, I'm going to select my clone brush and then do it again. Or you can just set a really low flow. So it's like you're fading in instead of doing two steps. So you can say my flow is going to be 9% or something really low, gentle. Okay, under 10% is considered quite gentle, at least from my understanding. I'm going to sample and then just start brushing. And what happens is it fades that line, but keeps the texture around the area. Okay, so you can do multiple things. It's just relative to whatever it is that you want to do. And that's the best part about it. So I'm going to do it again, just by a little bit. I won't do a lot for this step. Right, good.
And Aloisio Aripe is wondering, why not do healing and cloning on the same layer? It doesn't look practical to go from one layer to another.
It is, and the only reason I'm doing it on 2 layers is to show you guys what I heal and what I clone. But typically I would do it on 1 layer.
Great.
And some people are really organized. They'll have healing for the face, healing for the legs, healing for the arms, and they'll stack it all. So it's really cool because it allows you to essentially just do it however you want to. The other thing is sometimes you can't heal and clone on the same layer because it does this weird thing. And I'll show you. Hopefully I can reproduce it. So let's say that I've how can I do this? I'm gonna experiment and see if this actually works here. It may not. Let's say clone.
Could you clarify when you were saying that you fade the healing brush? Do you mean reduce opacity?
Okay. So what I mean by that is, let's say I go ahead and heal this little strand of hair. I don't mean opacity in the sense where I adjust opacity here on the layers. What I mean is I adjust opacity based on the fade tool. So when I said fade the healing brush, I essentially meant, yes, adjust opacity under the fade option. But typically, I try not to say adjust the opacity because it confuses people instead to do opacity on the layers. So yes, what I mean is once you've healed out anything you'd like, just go into Edit and Fade and adjust opacity under the Fade menu.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, let's see what we're getting out there. So let's pretend I heal and clone on the same layer. Let's say I'm going to clone this guy out here. Now let's say I take a healing brush and start healing around it. What tends to happen is sometimes you get little fringing going on in areas that you heal or clone, And it's a very odd occurrence. I don't know why that happens, but it does happen sometimes, which is why it's also a good idea sometimes to separate the two in cases that it does happen. And it's not something that can continuously reproduce, but when you do see that effect happen, you don't know where that haloing is coming from, that's what's happening. So maybe add a new blank layer and start working on that before going forward. So again, now dealing with this section here, okay, or even this section here, the way that I tackle it is multi-step. So first and foremost, I'm not going to cut it out completely. It's not going to be a cutout because it's going to look very obvious. But B, I want it to be less distracting. So what I do is I first start out by healing as much as I can to get more real estate space on the skin. So I'm going to start healing, healing, healing. And heal as much as possible without running into any problems. So I'm going to go, go, go. And let's see here. And again, I'm not really worried about the color of my skin. As long as I know my texture is being replaced properly, we're going to easily be able to fix all of that later on. So don't get so bogged down paying attention, which is very difficult sometimes, I know. Let's see here. So that didn't work because it started getting really blotchy. So that's probably where I'm going to stop there with my healing brush. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my clone brush, go to my clone layer, and let's say with a really low flow, like 5%, I'll experiment, I'm going to sample below it, right here. And then I'm going to start brushing above. And what happens is it starts to fade out the hair in a manner that would replace it naturally. And what it does is any area that goes into the actual scalp itself, you can mask out. So let's say, for example, I did a little bit more, where I went even further up the scalp, just to get a good coverage of the skin. What I could do then is add a mask and select my brush, and then with a low flow again, say 10% or so.
Brush mode.
Ah, there we go. Oh dear. Thank you. That's silly brush mode. See, again, the brush mode works on those flat layers, but not on blank layers. That's where you have to make sure you readjust your brush mode. And what happens is, it'll get rid of the hair that's on the scalp without going into the hair itself. I know it's a lot lighter right now, but again, this is where we're going to fix that in the lighting step. We're going to even it out. So don't worry about that so much. But the main takeaway there is it's easy to remove things that are on the scalp. And I'm going to brush just a little bit back in to kind of give it a natural wispy area. So it's not completely cut out, as I mentioned. So it's more transitioned over. Okay? Similarly, I'm going to come back on this side. And with a low flow, I'm going to go and brush across and sample areas that are very similar so that we can tackle these little flyaways without going too far. And then I'll mask it in later. So I'm going to go a little bit further and go into the scalp. And then I'm going to add my clone brush mask, and then come back. And just bring it in subtly. So it's not completely gone, but it's less distracting than it was before. Does that make sense? And what happens, any of the areas that have change in luminosity, I'm going to darken up later, just to match what it was before. But I'm not going to do that now. Again, lighting and everything comes later. Don't do everything at one go. Okay? All right. So essentially, what I want to do is create some clean, flat, even skin. The things that I don't mind are things like discoloration, you see any splotchiness in the skin, these bright spots, things like that. I'm not touching right now. That should not come right now. It should come in the next step. Okay? Also in this step should be things like dust spots in the background like I did, or even if you had red lines in the eye, and the way that I take care of that is essentially just zoom in with my healing brush, with a really small healing brush, and just heal it out. Now we can zoom in a little bit more, take care of anything that is really, really, really bothering you, because I know some people are like, you didn't take that thing out and that thing out. Let's see here.
There was a question about lips and in particular how to deal with like basically adding chapstick effectively, like any cracked lips, stuff like that. Now, she doesn't really have that.
Yeah.
Do we have anything coming up where we'll deal with that, or would you be able to talk to it?
Sure. So one of the things that you can do right now is say you're in a hurry, which I don't recommend being in a hurry when you're retouching. But if you're in a hurry, you can go to your clone brush, select the actual area beside the actual chapped lip, like a valley, take it, and then brush it in. So what happens is, as you notice there, let me do it again, is when I sample and brush, you notice the actual lip becomes fuller and plumps out because the texture of the underlying, the texture of the layer, texture of the lip portion next to the chapped lip will fill it in. It's like a filler, so to speak. But you'd usually want to do this during the lighting step so that you can lighten up those cracks. But this is also a good way if you have extremely chapped lips where you have, you'd control by flow. Again, if you notice, flow is already taking part of everything. Without the flow, it's very hard to do some of these things that I'm doing. And even going across, the ends of the lip, it's something that you can take care of now by essentially just sampling with a clone brush and brushing. Now here's the cool part. I have a hard time going at this angle with my hand. My preference is going like this and not like this. So what I'm going to do is rotate my canvas really quick and then take care of that little area and then go back accordingly. So I know it looks funny, but you got to do what you got to do. So I'm going to sample next to the lip itself. I'm going to brush. I'm going to take care of that little makeup line and make it straight as possible. And again, I'm not worried about the fact that it got lighter because I'm going to be fixing that in the next step. I know this is like, what are you doing? But trust me on this.
We weren't laughing. We were laughing at ourselves for like, oh, why didn't I know?
Don't worry, I'm laughing at myself too. And let's see here. The other thing is I'm not trying to make it ultra precise because I think the main thing is I'm trying to make sure that you're getting the techniques down rather than spending double the time getting everything super precise. However, as long as you walk away with the same concepts and techniques is my main preference. Let's see here. So clearly, this is a lot lighter than I would have liked. However, since there aren't any great areas to source from, I can try again, just because I'm kind of picky. What you can do is then save that for the next step where you're lighting that area back in, or darkening it back in. It just blends in perfectly. So let me actually go and undo that real quick. Let me do one more time, just in case I have something that has a better end result. And sometimes it's okay to, do things over and over again because you may not have luck on the first go, and it's quite natural. Sometimes I don't have luck on the first day that I'm working on something, come back the next day with ideas, and I bounce it back between people. And a lot of my colleagues are good like that because we typically will work with each other. So say I'm working with another retoucher. What I will do is we will bounce ideas back and forth on a job. And sometimes I may not be able to do something as well as somebody else. And so he'll either tackle that portion and I'll outsource it to him, or we'll talk about it and say, what techniques would you recommend removing this crease? Nothing worked for me. And we will come up together and talk to each other. Just like I mentioned yesterday, by talking to your colleagues, you come up with so many ideas like that. So never feel ashamed of saying, I don't know how to do something. And there may be questions today where I'll say, I have no idea. I would look into that.
Speaking of not knowing how to do something, a lot of folks out there, it's kind of funny. It's the simple things. When you rotated the canvas, people are like, oh, you just rotate the canvas. It's so simple. But Dan G was wondering, is there a way to snap the canvas back to the original angle without trying to eyeball it?
Yeah. So the way that you do it is you go over here. Once you have your rotate button active, which is your E under your shortcuts, if you've changed it, by default it's R. Okay. So in case you want to add a shortcut first, it's R by default. Once you hit E and you rotate something, As your rotate tool is active, there's a reset view button here, and it'll just snap back perfectly. Oh man, that's actually a really common question. It's funny because I'll tell them the rotate tool, but I forget sometimes to tell them how to reset it. So the entire workflow is done, rotated. Like, I'm so sorry, I didn't tell you. Like a year later, they come back. I never knew how to rotate it back. Fantastic question. Now, let's see if there's anything else we can do right now. We can also have an option of doing, we can fill it in a little bit here. We can either, you save that for a darkening stage where we're essentially just darkening that portion, because in the makeup world, that's kind of like eyeshadow, filler, whatever. I'm not a makeup artist, I don't know what they're called. But what is it called?
Brow filler.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And so you'd fill it in, right? Make it darker. Or we could do something better and have an eyebrow brush, which every woman would probably like. And so I'm going to take my clone brush, set on my layer. Again, make sure your mask is not active as you're working. Because if your mask is active as you're working, you're going to be trying to copy and paste the stuff within the mask, and nothing's going to happen. You're going to be really frustrated. So again, so many small details. But it's a good thing because you can replace back and forth once you get this course, isn't it? So again, make sure you click on the layer itself. Always make sure the layer is active. There's always a little checklist. If you don't know what's wrong, sometimes you may actually come across a point where you don't know why something's not working. There's typically a few things why that happens. One, you're not on the right layer. Make sure your layer is active. Number two, you're not on a mask. Make sure your mask is not active. Number three, you don't have Q selected. Q is quick mask. Quick mask will make your life miserable because, well, Q was quick mask. I changed it. But typically what quick mask does is it tries to make like a quick selection. And then once you get out of quick mask, it makes a selection for you. So if you have quick mask enabled, it's going to be a problem because by default, quick mask is Q. That's why I changed it to get that out of there. That took a while to figure out, shamefully so.
And the shift key.
Yeah.
Caps locks is evil too.
Oh yeah, caps lock. If you don't know where your brush is, it's like, where's my brush? It's so tiny. Make sure your caps lock is not on, because if it is, you're never going to get out of that little crosshatch. Secondly, your flow. Make sure it's not 1% all the time, because if you're trying to do something really quickly, you don't know why it's working, it's because it's at 1%. So a few things to keep in mind, make a note of that, because it is something that happens all the time. And I was just about to do that because I had that quick mask selected, because I'm not so smart sometimes. Now, going under your clone, we're going to go and fill that little gap in real quick. And I'm going to select the outside here and brush it in. And you notice it filled it in quite nicely. There may be some repeating patterns. Sometimes it's not noticeable, sometimes it is. Get the patch that essentially works best for you. And if the luminosity changes, again, don't worry about it. We're going to fix it in the next step. Make do with what you have. As long as you can take care of things now that are available to you, it's probably better than just, trying to get everything perfect right now. Because that creates oddly more problems than it fixes, okay? Now, and remember, again, no one's going to see that. They're going to be zoomed out looking at your image like this. No one's going to see that little clone brush thing you did. And just because you can see it doesn't mean they're going to see it. It's kind of like when you go on Facebook. I use Facebook as an example a lot because it's so prominent. Everyone has it. Not because I'm endorsed by Facebook or anything. I'm not, trust me. But if you go on Facebook on your timeline, you tend to look at images from other artists and your friends, and you tell them, oh my God, it's so beautiful. And what do they typically say? Oh, thanks, but I think it's not that great, right? It's because they see all the mistakes, but the rest of the world isn't seeing it. Like if you go to every one of my images on my website, you will see mistakes. And that wasn't a ploy to get you to go to my website, but just to show you that it's true. We always have mistakes that we do, but we make them out to be bigger than what they are. It's very similar to reality and human nature. When we look at ourselves, we see all these flaws, but no one else is really seeing them because they're all focused on their own flaws, right? So that's kind of the whole principle. Like if I came out pajamas, you guys probably wouldn't care, but I'm not gonna do that just because it kind of looks ridiculous and because the producer said not to do that. So.
I will happily plug your website. Everybody go check out solsticeretouch.com. His work is amazing.
Thank you.
Obviously, you can see it here, but if you want to see a lot of his finished work, solsticeretouch.com.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Okay, fantastic. Now, again, the end goal of this whole process is to get skin flat and to the point where most of the distracting blemishes are taken care of. I'm not worried about transitions, or I'm not worried about deep color changes and things like that. I'm not worried about making transitions beautiful right now. This is just for the cleaning stage. But this is the most important stage, because if you don't do this correctly, the rest of your work is going to look really weird, and you don't want that to happen. Now, let's see, what can we do going forward? Going forward here, let's go and zoom in just a little bit to make sure that we have everything that we saw over here taken care of, and we do. But I'm going to zoom in just for the pixel peepers and show you what I left behind. You can see people are probably freaking out going, oh, all these little strands of hair, you should probably take them out, they're awful. But if you're not so concerned with zoomed out, it's going to add later to how beautiful the image looks. So you're not going to see it, again, but just to show people what I do, I'm going to do a few more, okay? I literally do the same thing over and over again. I sample in a good area and paste over the individual flyaways or strands of hair. You know, the funny thing about cameras these days are you tend to notice details that you never notice about yourself. So if you ever take selfies, I know a few of you guys here do, you learn more about yourself than you ever imagine in all the years that you look in the mirror. Let's see, some here. Again, just the ones that are extremely prominent. You can tell I'm not super careful, but as long as my principles stay intact, or I'm sampling from a very similar area and pasting on or over the blemish or flyaway that has very similar texture, then you're typically fine. The healing brush takes care of most of the guesswork for me, which is fantastic. I don't have to slow down and use my clone brush to heal or clone individual hairs, which is definitely what I want to get away from. Okay, let's see here. The other cool thing with the clone brush is if you are actually working on the edge of the dress, you'd sample on close to the skin and then brush away. I do want to apologize. I've been noticing that when I'm healing, sometimes I'm doing it in the clone layer. That's just my mistake, okay? Typically, you would heal on the healing layer and clone on the cloning layer. But again, it's just for organization. I'm just so used to doing it all on one layer. It just makes sense to me, which is why I'm always having A and S as my flipping variable. Okay, let's see if there's anything else I really, really want to take care of right now before going to the next step. I think that should really be it right now. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. So Command S. Okay. Now, the next portion is in regards to lighting, and it's going to be a two-step process. Now, what I mean by that is I'm going to show you a couple of methods to even out transitions and make skin more beautiful. The first method is very traditional and one that I recommend getting really good at because it's extremely powerful and has no limit to the control you have. It's also very simple. And I think people tend to forget about this process because people are so engrossed in this frequency separation thing, they forget about classical techniques that you need to know in order to have this control. And that is dodging and burning. And dodging and burning is something that really prevents you from going too far sometimes, because with frequency you can get really carried away and you can tell people who use frequency and abuse it. Because with that, what happens is people tend to go overboard because they have almost no limitation and they don't know how to control that rain, and it looks like a mess sometimes. So dodging and burning is something that you really need to know in order to even out skin naturally. It prevents you from going too far. Dodging and burning allows you to also accentuate highlights and deepen shadows and contouring and things like that from makeup and lighting, okay? So let me go and get started.
Pratik, before you go into lighting, if you would go to the bottom of the image, so you can see that on the camera right, that you see a little bit of her finger and maybe literally right at the very bottom, at least I think from this distance, it looks like there's a little bit of the forefinger.
Over here? Over here?
Right there.
Yeah.
And so where would you, if you were going to change that, when would you change that?
Okay, if I was to change that or remove it, so there's two things you can do. If you decide that you want to just liquefy a little bit to change the shape of it, that would be in the liquefy area. If you want to remove it, now is the time you would do so, because this step is essentially the removing step, the cleaning step. And the way that I would do that is I would take my clone brush again, and what I'm going to do first, let's get rid of this guy here. It's not really a guy. I don't know why I keep calling it a guy. It's ridiculous. I don't know where that came from. Sorry about that. Okay, so my flow is going to be set to say around 20%, a little quicker than 10%. I think the best thing is to practice with flow, get a use of how it works. I'm going to sample the background. I'm going to remove everything. I'm not going to be super detailed right now. Because what happens is if you're super detailed, you tend to get really particular next to the edges, and it takes forever with a clone brush, right? So instead what I do is I literally cover the entire area, and then with the mask, I'm going to come back and with my regular brush, making sure my mask is selected, and I have black as my brush color, because black hides. I know this is not Photoshop 101, but I have to keep reminding people, black is a color you use to hide what you've done. White is a color to reveal what you've done. And again, I'm using black because I'm going to hide the part of the hand that went into the dress, because I don't want that background seeping into the dress, just in the background. Now, again, with my brush selected, I'm going to have black as my color. And now I'm going to be going over here on the dress itself and coming in and fine-tuning the edge of the dress. So what happens now is I can do it really quickly without having to pester around by taking my clone brush and being very careful next to edges. I can be sloppy, but still efficient and much more precise. And similarly, you do the same over here with the bottom portion. That kind of, takes care of that. But I do know that this is something that I recommend leaving to the photographer. So I'm just going to quickly reveal that back. And they may give me one suggestion or another to remove or keep it. Typically, it's something that I'll probably remove as well. But, I'll just keep it out right now, just for the sake of keeping it as close to original as possible, in case Felix is like, why'd you do that? I didn't want to take it out. I'll take care of any last things that I see again before we go on to lighting, which is this little guy here. This little quick flyaway. It's really bothering me. As you can see, when you work with files that are extremely in detail, you get more, well, let's put it this way. When you work with files that capture more detail, you want to spend more time working, because what happens, you just see more things. So we want to get away from that practice. We want to get to a practice where no matter what you shoot with, the workflow and time will still stay the same amount.